This is Lisa Miller and Associates, Florida Insurance Roundup, your podcast on the people, issues, and regulations shaping Florida's insurance market. Now, here's Lisa Miller.
Welcome, friends. The Florida Legislature's 2022 session begins on January 11th and scheduled to end on March 11th. In those 60 days, our lawmakers are only required to pass a state budget for the next fiscal year and to pass a legislative and congressional redistricting map plan. There are insurance issues that need attention, and various bills have been filed to make things better for consumers, some of them building on last session, which Senate Bill 76, about a 41-page bill, did a lot in that direction, but there's more to be done. We are going to ask our guests today, who are Jim Saunders, who's the executive editor of the News Service of Florida. Jim is a nearly 25-year veteran of the Capitol Press Corps here in Tallahassee, and every committee meeting I'm in, I see Jim there. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Lisa.
And we also have Mike Vasilinda, founder of and chief reporter for Capitol News Service, which provides Florida's best political coverage on television for many stations across the state. Mike is the dean of the Capitol Press Corps, a great friend with more than 40 years of covering the legislature. Mike, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa.
Before we get into specific proposals, let's start broadly here. 2022 is an election year. And I wonder if lawmakers will decide to wait and see if the 2019 and the 2021 insurance reform measures are having enough of an impact on Florida's dire property insurance market. And the word dire was the exact word used by the insurance commissioner in a recent Senate committee meeting. Or maybe we just need minor adjustments. So we'll talk about property insurance. We're going to talk about Surfside and that tragedy that happened there, and a couple of other topics that I think you'll enjoy today. So first up, let's talk about, Jim and Mike, what happened in Surfside, Florida, and that awful Champlain Towers collapse. And I'll go to you first, Jim. You know, there's been a few bills filed, one that deals with condo board members, and if they take kickbacks, they could be guilty of a felony. What do you think the legislature will or won't do based on that terrible tragedy?
Well, I think they're going to be facing pressure to do something. But I think anybody who's been around here for long and watched condo bills knows how complex and convoluted and very difficult to sort through what goes on with condo association bills. They can be very difficult. There's different parties involved in that. There's the boards, there's developers, it isn't as simple as I think a lot of people envision it to fix the problems that have gone on there and to try to prevent something like that from happening other places. I also think, condo boards themselves are very dysfunctional quite often. And I think there's a lot of competing factors there that do make it more complex than you might think.
Well, and the couple of bills that I saw there, House Bill 329 by Representative Nicholas Duran out of Miami, establishes a searchable database. And Mike, I know you know this. When that condo collapsed, I remember our incredible emergency manager, Kevin Guthrie, was seen talking on the media that he couldn't get basic data, how many units, what was in the units. You can't just click on a, and you had to go to the county clerk's office, if I remember, to try to find some of that. So that bill would fix that if it passes. And then, of course, Senator Jason Pizzo, another wonderful, incredible legislator whose district that the collapse occurred, he's very concerned about condo board members not. So, Mike, from your perspective and your great experience, what do you think condo board members are saying about some of this proposed legislation, and what do you think should be done?
Well, I think certainly they are saying, how the heck are we going to afford this in the situation of the particular tower that collapsed? It was, an estimate of up to $3 million. But I will tell you, one of the real pressures, I think, on the legislature is the grand jury report from Miami-Dade that came out that basically said this stuff needs to be inspected every 10 or 15 years. Now, remember, harken back, I think, to 2005, 2006. The legislature passed a bill requiring inspections every 10 years. And then by 2010, the condo boards were so upset, flexed their muscles, gave a lot of money out, and ended up getting that legislation repealed.
So it's interesting you say that. I attended the National Council of Insurance Legislators, out in Arizona recently, and all those insurance legislators from across the country are asking what's happening in Florida, Lisa, and what can we do so it doesn't happen again. So all eyes are going to be in the legislature, and I think there's actually two kinds of condo boards. You talk about dysfunctional boards, Jim. There are those that don't want to know what's going on with their buildings, and there are those that do. So we hope there's more of those, Jim.
Well, and I think to go to Mike's point, part of it is the financial pressure on these boards. If there's been an issue in the past about retrofitting buildings with fire sprinklers, and it kept getting pushed off. And as far as I know, it's kept still getting pushed off. I'm not sure. And the reason it keeps getting pushed off is that, it costs a lot of money to go into these old buildings and retrofit them with fire sprinklers. And I mean, that's just one example of the types of issues that these boards might be confronted with if all of a sudden they have to bring their buildings more up to modern standards or codes, and a lot of them are filled with retirees, and they don't want to spend the money or can't spend the money. That is a factor in this that's going to come to play if the legislature tries to require too much, or comes down on the boards that they have to do certain things. I think that's another factor in the debate.
And I don't see the realtors pushing very hard right now, because the great concern was nobody wants to live in a condo or buy a condo anymore. But like every other housing product in Florida, the property values are going up, and they're getting sold, like wildfire. So the collapse did not hurt the condo market. Therefore, there are not realtors out there screaming, "We got to fix a problem so we can get our commission."
We will wait and see what happens. I know there were those that were talking about incentivizing boards to pay more attention and to work on the maintenance that's being deferred next year and the next year. In fact, I was noticing the Department of Financial Services has filed a bill that would encourage home hardening, strengthening buildings, and it would give a tax exemption for retrofits. Maybe that's something, almost like a tax savings account, if you will, that would help. So that may be some way to go. Let's move on from Surfside to the property insurance industry, which is near and dear to my heart. We've had a couple of bills that passed in 2019, 2021. Mike, you were telling me before we started recording about, rates going up with some of your colleagues. Tell us about that.
Sure. I have a gentleman that works for me. His insurance went up $100 a month, he said, starting in January. And then my son, who owns a very small house down in a very rural community, saw his $3,000 policy go to $3,400. And you've got to wonder how people are going to be able to afford this, particularly if they're not on an escrow account with their bank. In a lot of cases, particularly if they already own the house and it's paid off. He was considering going bare because he doesn't think his house is going to blow down or catch on fire, and he thinks that what he's paying is too much. And so I think we're going to see some more people doing that if there's not a solution here.
Jim, what are your thoughts about it on the property insurance side? What have your rates gone up? We're pretty, I would think, insulated here, but it doesn't sound like it.
I mean, I've had an increase, but it's not anything that is set my hair on fire. I'm pretty happy when I get my renewal notice, actually.
Right.
But from what I hear from other places in the state, but I don't think we can discount that this is an election year. I think that you can frame a lot of issues in that context, but I think property insurance is one of them. There's going to be a ton of pressure from the insurance industry to do something about this. But there's also going to be a lot of pushback from the folks in South Florida and the legislature, the coastal folks, because, it's if you do certain things, it's going to drive up costs. The issues last year with Senate Bill 76, I think one of the most controversial was what to do about roofs. Mm-hmm. The solution that the Senate pursued, which didn't pass in the end, would have cost a lot of people to have to replace their roofs, mm-hmm. bottom line. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of money for a lot of people. I think the real key is how far Governor DeSantis wants to push on doing something about property insurance. If he comes down and says we have to do something, maybe the legislative leadership will do it. But he's going to be in a re-election campaign, and does he want to take that on mm-hmm. In an election year? I'm not sure at this point. We haven't heard a lot from him about it, but I don't think you can divorce this issue from the politics that have always been around it, actually. And Charlie Crist if he's the Democratic nominee, is gonna say big bad insurers, raise your rates. And that's just a fact that he's going to say that, and probably other Democrats will say that. Some already have in the legislature.
See, I think the governor's got to pay attention, because it was Charlie Crist who stalled citizens' rates when he was governor in 2007 for 2 years where they couldn't raise their rates, and then they created the 10% glide path, which, for whatever reason, citizens never, ever got to a 10% across the board on anybody, and now they're proposing 11 and 12% across the board on everybody, and that is going to be some political pressure, I think, for the governor. He's going to hear about it in the villages and everywhere else he's going, and he's going to know that Governor Crist at the time was the guy that froze those rates, and he'll try and use that against the governor, the former governor, and so we'll see how that's all going to play out by the time. It needs to play out pretty quickly, because no one's going to get really ginned up on the campaign until the summer. So,
I think it'll be interesting too whether OIR, the Office of Insurance Regulation, approves that 11% across the board. The Citizens Board last year threw out some things that were fairly ambitious to try to increase rates, for instance, for new customers of Citizens beyond the glide path cap, so-called, and OIR rejected them. So, I don't know what OIR is going to do with that, but going to a 11% across the board and then 12% in 2023 has not been tried before. And, the citizens' actuaries didn't recommend that. So,
but you've got Senate Bill 76, and part of it allowed that thing to go up 1% a year.
No, I realize that, but I'm just wondering.
It has to be justified actuarially. Yes.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And, they were saying that some people in Miami-Dade, the actuaries from Citizens saying some people in Miami-Dade the rate should only go up 3%. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, if you put 11 on them, how does OIR react to that? And I think, Lisa, you know far more about this than I do, but I think OIR feels political pressure as well. So, I think to think otherwise is probably a little naive.
The most interesting thing about what's going on in the property insurance industry when it comes to roofs is that yin and yang of replacement costs versus actual cash value. As you said, Jim, the Senate passed the provision for actual cash value. The House rejected it. There is now a move, like, for example, I have an 11-year-old roof. I'm getting it replaced next year because there's no such thing as a 30-year shingle. I think this all goes back to the roofing manufacturers. They put that label on the roofing shingles that says 30 years. If it's 110 degrees in Florida in the summer, it isn't going to last 30 years, and it misleads people. And so I think we have to start at the roofing manufacturers, educate consumers that there's no such thing as a 30-year shingle, and have them, consumers, to my opinion, should have a choice. If they want to have skin in the game, have a lower premium, have actual cash value, for those that want replacement costs, let them have it. But those choices were not offered in the legislature, and unfortunately, who knows where that's going to go this session. I do think, though, and I'd like to get your opinion about this, rates are up. When I talk to legislators, I ask them always, first of all, what are you going to do for the 2022 session? And what is the number 1 or 2 or 3 issue you hear when constituents call your phone lines? COVID and unemployment is number 1. Property insurance is number 2. Auto insurance and every other insurance is number 3. Now, it's just very prevalent. Mike?
Well, the governor's already said that the PIP overhaul that was passed last year that he vetoed would have raised insurance rates. So I think that was a very clear signal to the legislature. If I'm here, I'm not going to allow you to do that, because that is going to be a 30 or 40% hike on some auto insurance policies. Mm-hmm. But it will get rid of the fraud probably in the long run, which is the long-term solution. And so, somewhere there needs to be a carrot there for people to have options, much like with other things like hurricane insurance. You can choose your level of insurance that deductible that you want, and I think that needs to probably move into these other areas.
Moving from insurance, let's talk about this new COVID strain that's out there, because with insurance rate going up everywhere from health insurance, auto insurance, et cetera, I think people are struggling financially, and the economic impact of COVID just piles on to their insurance rates going up and everything, gallon of milk going up. What do we think What do you think we're going to be in the next 3 months, Jim? What do you think with this new you hear about this new strain that's out there? What are your thoughts? What are you hearing in the ecosystem about Omicron?
I think everybody's kind of shell-shocked at this point. It just keeps
worn out,
one
Yes.
after another, and we thought we were kind of through it here, and and then so at least from a Florida business perspective, I mean, the governor has made very clear that they're not going to do anything to affect or to try to in any way shut down businesses or do anything. And now it's all in state law too after the special session. So if things get bad again, I think it sort of plays on people mentally in terms of whether they're willing to go out for a steak on Friday night and whether they're willing to, go have a cup of coffee with their friends. And I mean, that just plays out throughout the entire economy and also in the social system. So, I don't know. I mean, I honestly, it's sort of this whole past 2 weeks has been kind of discouraging.
It is discouraging. It is.
But what the answers are, I mean, and where we're going, you listen to the national experts and they don't seem to know exactly where we're going.
So we've got to stay safe. Mike, you just came back from a trip. What happened to you when it came to COVID?
Well, I mean, we were required to wear a mask every time we were in an airport or an airplane, but I will tell you, the airplanes were all full, and no one seemed to be too concerned about what was going on. Number of people tried to fake the mask down around their chins, for a little while, but the stewardesses and the flight attendants were pretty good at reminding them. But, COVID did not seem to be a big issue on the planes, but yet out where I was in Utah, one of the resorts where I was skiing required full vaccination to eat in the cafeterias there. And I thought that was really, it was one of two resorts that are pretty big in Park City where I was. The other resort wasn't requiring that. So it was kind of a catch as you can in one and the other. But I just don't know what this latest strain is going to be. And we don't seem to be getting a lot of good information about, it's very mild or it's not. And now we hear Regeneron doesn't necessarily work against the latest variation. So the next month or so, or probably 2 months, probably will be very telling if how many other states start to shut down. But I mean, you're seeing people pulling kids out of school already to finish the school year, or at least this semester until this passes, and going back to remote learning. And I think, the jury's in on that one. It doesn't work as well as it should for kids that haven't been doing it for a while.
Any bets on if the Capitol closes, Jim?
I don't think it will.
Mike?
I don't think it will, but I've been wondering, and I haven't reached out, of whether the Senate is considering what they did last year with remote testimony. They liked that a lot because they were able to really shut down a lot of stuff. And I don't think anyone's going to say that out loud, but yeah, you can have a minute. And you're not really in front of me.
You over at the Tucker Center, you can have a minute.
Yeah, you drove 300 miles to tell us what you thought. You got 30 seconds.
We'll see. I don't know if they're going to do it or not. I also believe it depends on how many come down with it or are affected by it or are testing positive. I think that's going to really determine if they keep the Capitol. But we'll see. I mean, Jim?
I sort of think they've gone so far down the path with this special session and stuff. It would they're going to have a hard time going back to closing things off.
I got you.
I think.
But at the same time, it was a very underreported issue. But the cafeteria in the Capitol was shut for 7 days because the kitchen manager there had COVID. And so the COVID has affected operations in the Capitol from that perspective. And if this thing is very strong and very serious, I think all bets are off.
We're going to move on to two more issues before we call it a wrap. Let's talk about pharmacy benefit managers and independent pharmacies and that legislation. I'm sort of following that because I buy my medicines from an independent pharmacy. And so it's kind of near and dear to my heart. And oftentimes the independent pharmacy owners, you see them in the Capitol as well as I hear them when I go through my independent pharmacy drive-through, talk about the stronghold they feel like they have with the pharmacy benefit managers. Mike, any experience with that much at all? Or?
Well, I think you made a good point that they really are just the middleman between the manufacturer and the distributor, much like what happens with liquor in this Florida with the Tide House issue where the manufacturer can't sell it to the consumer. It has to go to a distributor who can then sell it to the retailer. And that's basically what you described this as, and I think you're dead accurate with that. people are complaining about their drug prices, and they are complaining about less benefits on their health insurance policy for the things they're doing. But so this might be one way, if the legislature were to try and thread that needle to try and lower those costs in some way. So far, we haven't seen anything from the idea of buying drugs out of state, although that really, for the most part, went to the Department of Corrections and stuff with the kind of drugs they're buying from other countries. But it's one of those issues that it just may be too much to tackle. I mean, let's think about it. There's just, by the time people get done with drawing maps, they're going to be tired. They're going to be, because it's going to be tedious. It's never not.
So that's a great segue to maps, and this will be our last subject. And anytime we can do this again, maybe in the middle of session, talk to us about the maps. It's for the listening audience that don't understand this whole redistricting mystique, Jim. Give them a quick primer on it.
Well, it is kind of a food fight, and the legislature this year, like they did 10 years ago, is saying how transparent they are and how legal all this is going to be. And I must admit, I am I will believe it when I see it, because that's what they told us 10 years ago. And then the courts came down on them hard for all the behind the scenes shenanigans that went on in drawing these maps. And I mean, I've been through 2 redistricting processes. Wow. Mike's been through more than that, but that's the way it's always been. It's not only parties looking for advantages, but it's individual legislators looking to save their careers. And I don't think you can ever discount that. The Republicans have huge majorities in the House and the Senate, and they can pretty much do what they want within bounds. And the other thing I think that's just really important to remember this year is that the court system in Florida has done a complete 180 especially the Florida Supreme Court has done a complete 180 from the last however many redistricting cycles, but it is a very conservative court now. And 10 years ago, it was not. It was a liberal court, more liberal, pretty liberal court. And I think that the Supreme Court's going to give a whole lot more leeway to the legislature, whatever the legislature draws this time, than they did the last time. So I think that sort of feeds into the recipe of Republicans going to have a lot of leeway to draw the maps the way they want to, and there's not going to be as much of a legal check. You draw a line a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, it can make a difference, and especially as sophisticated as the computer modeling is now.
10 years ago, I thought that it was an interesting dynamic because the House was considered the good guy in the fight because, they put like 20 members and 30 members or so in districts that were going to make them have to compete with perhaps another legislator, which there was very little of that by the time it was done. But no one challenged the House maps. And if you really looked at them, which I did very, very closely because I had a personal interest in them at the time, they were as bad or worse than what the Senate had done, but they'd done such a good public relations job. And then this year, you've kind of got the Senate being the good guy. Right. Everybody's raving. The Democrats in the Senate are saying, hey, these maps are all pretty good. We could probably live with these. But then the House is the one that's playing some games, it appears, to distract perhaps the attention and how that all plays out. But we will see it in court. I can't imagine we won't. I see that Stephanie Murphy has now decided she's not going to try and seek re-election in that Central Florida seat, which does that mean Anthony Sabatini actually goes to Congress? More likely anyway, more likely. But it's going to be interesting to see how people chop this up.
Well, I think if you look at the 2 seats the Republicans have talked about winning the most, congressional, one was Stephanie Murphy and the other was Charlie Crist, and neither one of them is running for re-election.
Interesting.
In their seats, and I think that's sort of it's sort of revealing to me, at least. But
yeah, and in the CD 13, which is the Crist seat, the first Senate proposal looks like that'll stay a Democratic seat, but where does that end in the mix?
Right, exactly.
So.
Well, I think that redistricting, those maps, those meetings are going to be the most important. It'll just hover over everything else that's happening, including the budget. So we'll wait and see. This will be how many years for you session-wise, Mike?
This will be my 49th session.
And I started when I was 18, and I'm 61, so this is my 30th. 8th, on and off. I wasn't in it full time like you. How about you, Jim?
You guys are making me feel young. I started here in 98 was my first session.
Wow.
So however many that is.
So
24.
interesting factoid, because they only used to meet every other year. I've been at 39.51% of every legislative session held since statehood.
Wow. Cheers to Mike Vasilinda. And that will wrap us up today, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us on the Florida Insurance Roundup. We have had on our guest today Jim Saunders, who's the executive editor of the News Service of Florida. I am a great subscriber and a great fan of that great news source. Thank you so much for being here, Jim, on the Florida Insurance Roundup and just kind of telling us what's going on. I'll see you in the Capitol on a regular basis. And Mike, I follow your work all the time. Every time I see you with that camera, you've got great team members. They love working with you. You cover the news. You're very fair about it. And for those of you that don't know who Mike Vasilinda is or Jim Saunders, I encourage you to Google them, look at what they do, support their work. We need our great reporters and do what we can to keep the media, alive and well, particularly great reporters like this. So, folks, I want to hear what you think. For those of you that want to follow the legislature, we can certainly help you do that this session. It convenes on January 11th. I try to do what I can to cover insurance as my primary issue, but I love looking at everything because I'm a Floridian first. And so we want to hear from you and let us know what your experience is on any insurance issue or other issues for that matter. You can call us and leave your comment or question for our later reply on air right here at the Florida Insurance Roundup by dialing 850-388-8002. That's 8002. Or drop us an email at lisamiller@lisamillerassociates.com. And I wish everybody happy holidays and that you stay close to your family. And all of us are going to have to pull for each other through this next strain of the coronavirus and COVID, and we'll make sure we take care of each other to be well. So we've got great things coming in 2022. We look forward to other great guests. If you're interested in appearing on the Florida Insurance Roundup, let us know that. We love to sit down and talk with great people. We've got a great passion for policy and client success at this firm. I work very hard with my clients and my friends. I'm fortunate to have each of you support what I do, and I'm here for you anytime. So until next time, stay safe.
This has been Lisa Miller and Associates Florida Insurance Roundup, your podcast on the people, issues, and regulations shaping Florida's insurance market. For more information on today's program, please visit us on the web at www.lisamillerassociates.com.